Hello, and welcome back to the 36th installment of Reconciling Zero as we go in search of Effective Zen. The question we posed last week was, what is a proper reading of the self? Recall that as part of our quest to answer the question, is this Zen mountain? We have recently been examining the notion of Zero Buddhism, the requisite conditions needed for the activity of Buddhism to arise. Previously, we identified 3 such conditions. First, we need an enlightened teacher. Second, we need a clear picture of our path forward. And last, we need an understanding of the obstacles expected along this path. And the bottom line is that if any one of these 3 conditions is missing, it cannot be called Buddhism. It may be helpful, and it may even be spiritual. It's just not Buddhism. And over the last couple of weeks, we expanded our investigation of an enlightened teacher to include the characteristics of an effective teacher. We summarized an effective teacher as one who recognizes that at some level all of us seek perfect certainty, which ultimately manifests as the realization of infinite mind, and which is invariably obstructed by a misreading of the self. So, if we are invariably obstructed from perfect certainty by a misreading of the self, how do we fix this? The first option, of course, is an effective teacher. Short of that, or as another source, we might turn once again to the Buddha. It will be useful to note that the Buddha addressed this very topic in just his second discourse after his enlightenment. The discourse is called the Anatta-lakkhana Sutta and translates as the characteristics of not-self. And while very important, it is, on first reading, a bit much to take in. But with some work and help, we can get through it. And we should want to make the effort to get through it. After all, understanding favors the relentless. But before diving in, it will be handy to get clear on the notion of what are called the 5 aggregates, and then revisit the Zen master Joshu Sasaki's teaching of Zero. Now, the notion of the 5 aggregates is based on the idea that some perspective of the whole can be attained by an examination of its parts. And the human experience can be thought of as having 5 such constituent parts, often called the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are form, which refers to the physical aspect of our being, and especially important for this discussion are our sense organs, eyes, ears, sense of smell, etc. The second of the 5 aggregates, consciousness, which refers to our ability to sense, see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. The third of the 5 aggregates, perception, which refers to our cognitive abilities, which rely, of course, on consciousness. The fourth of the 5 aggregates is feeling, which refers to how we react to what we perceive, positively, negatively, or neutrally. And finally, volition, which, based on feeling, refers to our ability to choose and act. And so we can see the 5 aggregates as a hierarchy of human endeavor that begins with form and ultimately results in choice and action. Now, returning to the teaching of Zero, recall that a fundamental premise of Zero is that all phenomena can be regarded as activity. Sasaki would often remark, Buddhism is not an object. And here we can plug in just about any word to include the self. We might just as confidently proclaim that the self is not an object. And so, again and again, Sasaki would teach, Zero inevitably splits into mutually opposing activities called plus and minus, which inevitably disappear back into zero. And when referring to the activity of the self, Sasaki might say, the zero self, that activity that does not need to proclaim itself, inevitably splits into the plus and minus activities that do need to proclaim itself. They proclaim themselves as I am and I am not. These plus and minus activities inevitably cancel each other, resulting in the return to the zero self. While still admittedly a bit cryptic, with some reflection we can use the teaching of zero to infer several characteristics of the activity of the self. First, the plus and minus activities that constitute the I am self inevitably arise and disappear. There is no stopping that process. Second, the activity of the I am self arising from the zero self implies that requisite conditions needed for the I am self to arise are indeed present. Here it might be helpful to recall the example of fire, where zero fire represents the requisite conditions needed for an actual fire to arise. We can say that oxygen and combustible materials are zero fire, and that lack of oxygen or combustible materials means no chance of fire. Last, again, we're talking about the characteristics of the I am self. The length of time that an I am self manifests depends on the relative strength of the opposing activities, I am and I am not. For example, if the I am activity is much stronger than the I am not activity, the I am self may manifest for quite some time. So, with the notion of the 5 aggregates and the refresher of zero as a background, I now encourage you to give this sutta a read, and I placed a link in the post. As you read through this vital discourse, here are a few questions to consider. First, while very short, we can partition this sutta into 6 sections: a prologue, 4 logic presentations, and an epilogue. The question is, can you identify these 6 sections? Second, the Buddha makes the argument that the 5 aggregates are not self. The question is, what is the fundamental logic of this claim? Third, the Buddha speaks of the activity of compelling or asserting, of one making statements like, may my form be like this, may my form be not like that. The question is, what generalization can we make about this activity of compelling? And the last question, in one section, the Buddha examines the suitability of statements like, this is mine, I am this is myself. But in the next section, the Buddha asserts that when it comes to the 5 aggregates, the proper attitude should be, this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. The question is, how do these different perspectives fit into Joshu Sasaki's teaching of zero? So we now have enough of a foundation to start working through the Buddha's second discourse. And hopefully the 4 questions can provide a jump start to our understanding of the self. So where do we go from here? Well, how about if we work through the entire Anatta Lakkhana Sutta together? For next week, can we come to really appreciate the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta? And until next week, cheers!